Okay, I'm going to get started. Everybody hear me okay in back? Yes? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So welcome to Global Sports Culture. I'm your professor, Iago Colas, and you've got 3 graduate student instructors for the course as well. Elizabeth is down here, and Lauren and Nate. You'll get to know them all very well shortly. So today, I'm going to show you how I'd like you to wind up thinking about sports in this course and to give you an overview of some of the ideas that we'll be studying to get there. But I'm going to start off in a way that I'm afraid may seem kind of weird to some of you. So please bear with me. Either way, it'll all be over pretty soon. So here we go. I'm going to ask you to start by closing your eyes. So if you are still trying to find a seat, you can find a seat and then close your eyes. But if you've already sit down, close your eyes and I'll let you know when you can open them. It is January 1976, the frozen dead of winter in Madison, Wisconsin. I am 10 years old and sprawled with my best friend Rob, who is 11, on the shag rug in my parents' living room. We are watching the American Basketball Association All-Star Game. Though the upstart league was bankrupt, and this would be its last season, it had already captured our youthful imaginations with its bright red, white, and blue basketball, its zany marketing antics, and above all, the acrobatic play of its biggest star, Julius Erving, known as Dr. J, because of the way he operated. Normally, halftime is when Rob and I go out to play some one-on-one, careful to avoid the patches of ice in my driveway. But today, the ABA has advertised something that has never happened outside of our imaginations: a slam dunk contest. A handful of players, including Dr. J, would take turns throwing down creative dunks, showing off their imagination, leaping ability, power, and skill. Just before his final turn in the contest, Dr. J stood at the free throw line facing the basket. Then, dramatically, palming the ball in one hand, he turned and in loping strides measured the steps to the free throw area at the other end of the court. Rob and I watched, confused and breathless with anticipation. Dr. J then turned back to face up court, paused, and with the ball still held firmly in his right hand, sprinted back toward the original basket. When his left foot hit the free throw line, he took off, soaring toward the hoop, high blowout afro shifting slightly backward in the wind, raising the ball up and back with his right arm, like Lady Liberty holding her torch. He jammed it down through the basket as flashbulbs popped. Rob and I sprang to our feet, laughing and shouting and shoving each other. The play was worth 0 points, but Dr. J's imagination and freedom raced like a warm current through our young minds and hearts and bodies. Moments later, we took turns imitating the dunk on the improvised hoop in my basement. I don't think we came back up to watch the rest of the game. Okay, thanks. You can open your eyes now. Works. Something to show you.
On the other end of the court.
So 40 years later, just a few months ago, over dinner at his home outside Washington, Rob and I remembered that day and that play and watched that dunk together again. I love sports. I've played sports, mostly soccer and basketball, especially basketball, my whole life. As a child, I first dribbled around and heaved the ball up at the hoop in my family's driveway just to be with and try to be like my older brothers. As they moved on and strife and conflict moved into our household, dribbling and shooting became for me a haven of happy absorption, and the driveway the place that I would go for solitude, for peace, and for ease. A few years later, I joined school teams and developed goals and the habits of self-discipline and lucid self-assessment required to meet them. I bonded with teammates and learned how to harmonize my personality and skill with theirs. I learned how to keep a win from going to my head and a loss to my heart. But I still also played on my own or with friends like Rob whenever I had the chance. Once my competitive career ended after high school, I continued to play on intramural or city league teams or just wherever I could find a hoop. Today, at the age of 51, I still play basketball at least a couple of times a week, mostly with men and women half my age or younger. Now my athletic abilities, that's a good dish right there, have diminished because of age and injury. Now my goals are more modest, but the joys of playing have only grown richer as every outing becomes an unpredictable encounter with limitations imposed by my body and the bodies of my opponents, and therefore also a challenging and rewarding opportunity to discover within myself and to cultivate new abilities and ways of enjoying playing sports. I have also loved watching sports my whole life. Mostly when I watch, I don't find myself caring too much who wins. In fact, I find that I get the greatest joy in watching when I don't care too much who wins. As the outcome fades from the center of my emotional attention, I get more absorbed in the action unfolding second by second in each present moment. Now I note the details of an individual athlete's movements. Now I step back to take in the broader patterns of collective motion. At such times, sports, when I would say I'm at my best, becomes a mesmerizing thing. It becomes a bonfire, both roaring and calming, or an ocean wave, both crashing and peaceful. Though I probably know sports, like with my brain, better than I know anything else in the world, I probably enjoy it most, like with all of me, when my knowledge slips away into the background and I allow myself to be absorbed in the kaleidoscope of size, power, athleticism, and skill that swirls in constant, unrepeatable motion. When I fall, fascinated by this mystery, into wonder, as Rob and I did so long ago on that cold afternoon in my parents' house in Madison. I bet most of you know what I'm talking about. I bet most of you have had some experiences like this. And I bet that this is why, maybe along with needing a humanities course, that you've chosen to be here in this room today. So now I'd like you all to take a moment on your own to recall some cherished sports memory of yours. When you have it in your mind, I want you to take out something to write with. It can just be a scrap of paper. You're not going to turn this in. Nobody else is going to see it. Or a laptop if you have one, whatever. And in a column down the left, I want you to write the following. Once you have that image in your mind, close your eyes if you need to. It can be something, a time you were playing competitively or recreationally. It can be a time you were watching, maybe a game someone took you to when you were young, or some special cherished moment. Once you have it in your mind and you've written down these words, I would like you to just take a minute to jot just 2 or 3 words next to each of these that indicate what you saw, what you heard, what you smelled, tasted, touched, and felt during that experience. As I say, nobody's going to see this but you. I am going to ask you to save it, though. Why don't you put your hand up when you finished? Like, it doesn't have to be a novel, just a few words. Hands up when you're done. Oh, okay. That's better. All right, I'm going to take another half minute or so. I appreciate that you're taking this seriously. It's good. So the idea of having you do that after I shared my own memory is to just point out what might be obvious to you, but to really make it concrete and visceral and something you can feel with your body. That maybe for all of our differences in this room, we all in here share this. And maybe we share it with hundreds of millions of people around the globe for whom sports is a path to feel more fully and meaningfully alive as human beings. That dimension and potential of sports to help us experience, explore, and express what it is to be human, is the central focus of this course. Now, some of you have chosen to major in areas like sport management or movement science or business or psychology or communications in hopes of one day pursuing a career in sports. I can relate to those hopes, because though I didn't know it when I was your age, I would one day make my love of sports into the central focus of my career, not in any of those fields, but as a professor in the humanities, and specifically of literature. Now, from what I've seen, very few of you major in the humanities, and for many of you, this might be the very first humanities course you've taken. Most of you probably have never even heard of comparative literature before you signed up for this course. That's okay. But I do want to take a few minutes to give you a sense of what we do in the humanities and of how we can approach sports as an area of creative human expression. In the humanities, we look at the different ways that human beings have experienced and explored and expressed what it is to be human, humanities. Traditionally, these forms of activity and expression have been grouped into categories like religion, philosophy, the arts, and literature, including comparative literature, which looks at literature and culture from a global perspective across the boundaries of language and nationality. More recently, the humanities have widened to include popular forms of expression like movies, TV, and even new digital media. Now, typically, we study these forms of expression to try to understand what they can tell us about the person who created them and about that person's time and place and the ways of being human in their society. But we also compare them with our own experiences of being human and see what they can show us about those. And finally, and most importantly to me, we can learn from these forms about how we might be human in a fuller and more meaningful way, including supporting the efforts of other people to experience their humanity more fully. The humanities, in other words, might be boiled down to the study of things people make or do that they don't need in order to live, but that they do need in order to live meaningfully and happily. I like to think of the humanities as equipment for living. As we'll discover, the humanities has a long tradition of forgetting that all human expression, whatever it may tell us about human minds and souls, is always made by human bodies. Between this aversion to human bodies and an aversion to popular culture, humanities scholars have not usually viewed sports as part of this equipment for living. And therefore, it's still not very commonly taught in humanities courses. But as I've already said, and as I hope my story illustrated, I consider sports to be among those things that have helped me and many millions of others across the globe and spanning generations, perhaps and hopefully including most of you, to live more meaningful and happy human lives, lives with genuine connections to others. Now, this is going to get a little complicated for a minute or two. One of the peculiar things about studying the humanities is that the very work that we do to understand any form of human expression, whether we are reading, watching, listening, feeling, thinking, or writing, is itself a form of human expression. So we can call this reflexivity. When we study something in a humanities course, we are studying that thing, but we are simultaneously reflecting on how we are studying it. We are studying ourselves, and in the process, developing what we call metacognition, our understanding of how we think about things. This can be unsettling sometimes to those who are more accustomed to the methods of the social and natural sciences. In those fields, there are rules designed to separate us, the subject, that's us, from the thing we are studying, the object. Those rules seek to ensure that the person doing the studying doesn't get mixed up with the thing they are studying, and in this way foul up the investigation and muddy the results with personal biases. Those rules, in other words, provide us with the sense that we can know that thing, the object, objectively, without the interfering distortions of our own subjective perspective. Not here. In the humanities, such subjective perspectives and distortions are not only inevitable, they are as much what we are studying as anything else. For this reason, though there are certainly going to be facts to learn, for the most part, we focus less on arriving at the right answers or worrying about the wrong ones, and instead, we focus more on how we arrive at answers, how we think and express ourselves, and especially how we can discover questions, important ones, that can be more or less helpful to us individually or collectively to understand ourselves and others, and so to live better lives. That's about the best we can do. And that is why students, unaccustomed to the humanities, can often feel a bit at sea, like they aren't really getting anywhere. You may feel bewildered and at times even frustrated. If that happens, try to remember that the humanities are more about the process than the product, and that they're more about the journey than the destination. So I began with my personal story to emphasize that I am deeply, emotionally mixed up with the thing I'm supposed to be teaching you about. I cannot change that. All I can do is try to be as open about it as possible and use that openness to learn more about my relationship to sport. And the same will be true for all of you. Whatever you may learn in this class about the cultural forms that sports gives rise to around the world, such as a dunk in basketball, you should strive to keep sight of the ways in which your own personal experiences are actually giving shape to the thing you are studying. In other words, to put it bluntly, as far as this class goes, there is no such thing out in the world called global sports cultures that you will learn about, independently of the process of learning how you relate to it and think about that thing. Instead, you will learn about ways of seeing, a range of human activities and ideas that we can group together under the banner global sports cultures. And all the while, I want you to keep in mind that none of these ways of seeing are revealing the objective, true nature of global sports cultures, though each will reveal some dimension of them. Equally importantly, these ways will, if you remember to be on the lookout for it, they will reveal to you unexpected dimensions of your own relationship to sport. That's the subject of our course. And the more you can be aware of this, the more you will understand how that relationship works, what benefits and perhaps hidden drawbacks it has. And the more you can see that, the more you will become empowered to adjust it in beneficial ways. In other words, you'll become free to shape your own life, to tell your own story, and that, ultimately, may be the most important reason to study the humanities. So I have another exercise for you. You're going to use that same piece of paper. I want you to take a moment. There's going to be 3 questions. The first one, when have you felt most free? Just think of an instant. When you felt most free, however free, whatever free means to you. Just write a word or 2 down that will tell you, that will remind you of what moment you're thinking of. Okay, when you've written that down, I want you to think about the next question. What can I do to make being in this class feel that way? What do you need from the class, and especially from yourself, to feel that free in this class? And the last thing is, I want you to write down 3 words, no more than 3. Choose carefully. 3 words that represent your answer to question 2. Once again, no one's going to see this but you. It's just for you. But I want you to save it. Okay. So I'm thinking that up until this moment, some of this may be feeling a little abstract. So I'm going to try to make it more concrete by taking you through a simple example of how we in the humanities might approach sports, especially if we have an interest, like I do, in literature and language. Who's that? Russell Westbrook. That's right. Westbrook is one of my favorite professional basketball players. I can enjoy watching Westbrook all by myself, totally silently. But that's not how most of us engage with sports. Most of us like to share those experiences because they make them more enjoyable and meaningful. We tell friends what we've seen, we offer opinions, we read articles, watch programs, and get into arguments. And we do all of this in language. So with that in mind, here is a piece of language from a blog devoted to celebrating Russell Westbrook. I'm going to walk you through how we might approach it in a humanities class like this one. That's our piece of language. Russell Westbrook is a beast. So let me start by pointing out something really obvious. Russell Westbrook is not a beast. At least, he is not literally a beast. So the question is, are the authors of this sentence stupid? Or are they liars? Of course they're not. What they're doing is using what we call, in the humanities, figurative language. We use language in this way, figuratively, or we use figurative language, when we use what are called figures of speech to make our speech more interesting, persuasive, or impactful. There are many, many figures of speech. Here are just a few. But one of the most commonly used ones, and the one we're concerned with here, is called metaphor. You probably learned about metaphor in an English class, probably at the same time that you learned about similes, I'm guessing. You might remember that similes compare 2 different things by using words like or as. Russell Westbrook is like a beast would be a simile. Metaphors compare 2 different things directly without using those words. Russell Westbrook is a beast. We can use any of the main parts of speech, nouns, verbs, adjectives, or adverbs, as metaphors. And as the examples down here at the bottom suggest, metaphors aren't just something we find in literature. We use them all the time in daily life, including or even especially in talking about sports. So when I say Russell Westbrook is a beast, I'm using a metaphor. But how do they work? And why are they so important? I'm going to break it down for you now. The word metaphor comes from 2 ancient Greek words that mean to carry across. In modern Greek, the word, still the word, metaphora, just means moving van, like something you might get to move into a new apartment. So we can think of a metaphor as a moving van, a vehicle that carries an attribute or quality associated with one thing across to another thing that might not normally be associated with that quality. In my example, Beast is the metaphor or vehicle. It normally, literally, refers to an animal like a lion, which we might think of as powerful, ferocious, aggressive, and fearless. By metaphorically calling Westbrook a beast, I'm carrying those qualities across from the lion to Russ. Or in other words, I'm saying that Westbrook has those qualities that I associate with a beast. So, on your own, I don't have time for you to do it right now, but what I'd like you to do is think about some metaphors that come up for you when you think about sports. And the best way that I know to do this is to think about players or teams that you love or hate. And you will find that very quickly, just by telling someone about them, you will start to stumble into metaphors, possibly without even realizing you use them. All right. You might try that in discussion this week. So I'm going to highlight 3 important features of metaphors. A couple will be obvious, one will not, I think. First, they're creative. They don't describe things as they are, but they invite us to use our imagination to see things in a new way. Second, for that very reason, they can help us to learn, to improve cognition. Someone who didn't know much about basketball, for example, might not know quite what to look for or how to appreciate Westbrook's play. The metaphor might help such a person zero in on and articulate that power, ferocity, aggressiveness, and fearlessness are important elements in what they're finding exciting when they watch Westbrook. Third, for better and for worse, metaphors convey social attitudes and they shape social relations. To be clear, all language does this last thing, but metaphor does it in certain specific ways that I want to take you through. First, through their indirectness, metaphors can allow us to voice attitudes that we may not allow ourselves to voice directly, or that we may not even be aware that we hold. Metaphors suggest simple equations. Russell Westbrook is a beast. And this simplification can be extremely appealing when we are grappling with complicated social situations. And then, as metaphors become more widely used, the qualities that a metaphor imaginatively projects onto, say, an individual person can come to be seen as naturally or objectively or intrinsically part of that person or a group to which that person belongs to. In other words, metaphors can be the most commonly accepted and often unnoticed means by which we create and reinforce stereotypes. You can see this more clearly by going back to our example, Russell Westbrook is a beast. All right, remember that a metaphor is like a moving van. Beast is the van into which I put those positive qualities I wanted my listener to see in Russell Westbrook. Power, ferocity, aggression, fearlessness. But a metaphor is like a moving van that other people, past and present, have also rented. They've packed things into them and then they've left them behind. And we don't get to control whether our listener will unpack what we put in or what others put in. Take the word beast. It also means cruel, violent, savage, and inhuman. You could think of these as things that others have packed into the van beast and left behind. Your listener may pull those out first and mistakenly assume that that's what you meant to say about Westbrook. Moreover, they might then relay that down the line to yet another listener so that before you know it, your metaphor has helped contribute to a widely shared belief that Russell Westbrook is cruel, violent, savage, and inhuman. But check this out, it gets worse. Because in this particular example, the situation goes from just misleading to offensive and even potentially dangerous. Because Russell Westbrook is a black man. And we have a long history in this country of describing black men in exactly these terms, metaphorically, as a means to justify their enslavement, mistreatment, incarceration, or murder. It's easier to do all of those things to a beast than a person. This doesn't mean we shouldn't use metaphors, and that is a good thing because we can't actually avoid using metaphors. In fact, I'll be using them a great deal in this course. Metaphors you can think of as just tools, which is a metaphor, by the way, that we can use to either help us think better or to avoid thinking altogether. Either way, recognizing their power as tools should prompt us to use them with great care, to learn to identify metaphors readily, and to consider them critically. As I said, I use metaphors all the time. So I'm going to show you two now that I often use to convey my overall understanding of an approach to sports. Sports is a swatch in the larger fabric of society. This is really two metaphors. One compares society to fabric. That's a common one, I think. I just mean that society holds together through the interconnectedness of a great number of individual elements, all these threads. The other metaphor compares sports with a swatch of that fabric. Here, I mean that sports is part of society, not some sort of activity or domain that is separate from it. And it's not just one thread in the fabric. All of the same individual elements that make up the fabric of society make up the swatch of sports. And everything that we find in the swatch of sports, we can trace back out to society. Of course, like a swatch, we can tear sports away from society and look at it on its own. But in doing so, when we do so, we shouldn't forget that everything we see in that swatch, we will see in society and vice versa. I really like the simplicity of this metaphor. However, the very simplicity is also a limitation of it. Specifically, the metaphor of a swatch is too static. I want these things to be moving, and they're not. I want something dynamic in which all the interconnected bits are meshing together. So I'm going to try another one. Sports is a machine. At one end, the sports machine draws in raw materials in the form of capital, human bodies, some of your human bodies, ideas and desires. Its component parts include labor, both athletic and otherwise, governmental bureaucracies, educational institutions, administrative organizations, and private manufacturing and communications corporations. All these parts then transform those raw materials to spit out at the other end the performances, spectacles, images, and narratives that are consumed by hundreds of millions of sports fans around the globe on a daily basis, as well as the feelings, thoughts, words, and actions that these fans experience and undertake as a result. All right. I wonder if somebody will just throw out, anybody, some things that you think, other things you can think of that the sports machine makes. If you think of sports as a machine, what are some of its products? You could think really simply, games. All right, you take it. Go ahead. Money. That's a good one. You said money. Yeah, that's a big one. What are some other things? Just throw them out. You don't have to raise your hand. Just shout. Entertainment. Good. How about injured bodies? That could be one. Doesn't have to be something that the machine uniquely produces. Remember, it's part of society. Yeah. Just shout. Inspiration. Great. Traditions. Excellent. Anybody else? Blood, tears, joy, friendship, cheating, violence. The list could go on and on. It's a powerful machine. It produces a lot of different kinds of things. Thank you. All right, now every time you participate in a sport or watch one, every time you even think about sports or use a sports metaphor in your everyday speech, you are hooked up to the sports machine. Given that, this course invites you to think about 3 questions. How does the sports machine work? What is your role in its operation? Can we make it work better? To get at these questions over the course of the semester, I'm going to introduce you to a series of concepts that scholars from the humanities, but also from other disciplines, have found important for understanding sports and its relationship to culture and society. So metaphorically, I think of these concepts as lenses by which we can focus more clearly on certain aspects of the sports machine. Of course, like actual optical lenses, the very properties that enable one of these conceptual lenses to focus more clearly on some aspect of the sports machine will necessarily cause it to distort, as this lens does, other aspects. Some lenses are better for certain purposes than others. So you've got to think clearly and honestly about your purposes. If what you really want is to look closely at Jupiter, it's kind of dishonest and a little stupid to criticize a microscope for not helping you do that. It's not the right lens for your purpose. In the end, my purpose is to equip you with an array of lenses that you can explore, play with, and perhaps experimentally combine with one another to provide you with a clearer overall picture of the sports machine, and especially of your relationship to it. But you won't have that overall picture until the end. Right now, we're just at the beginning. So, to decide where to begin and what sequence to follow, I've grouped the 12 primary lenses that I'll be showing you this semester into 3 broad sets that I'm going to show you here as headings: individual, social, and cultural. Of course, every feeling, action, material thing, and word that goes into or comes out of the sports machine could be seen from an individual, a social, or a cultural point of view, among others, many others. So I just mean for these 3 headings to help you orient yourself as we go towards what aspect of the sports machine I'll be emphasizing in a given week. So our first 4 weeks, we'll consider together an imaginary individual engaging the sports machine, sort of an abstract individual. And we will focalize that individual's experience through 4 lenses: the body or embodiment, play, limits, and values. After that, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to plug that imaginary individual into society and vice versa, and study how societal forces and that individual might impact one another by looking at their interactions through 4 new lenses: organizations, markets, media, and politics. Finally, we'll conclude the course in the last 3 weeks by looking in detail at 3 cultural forms generated by the interactions between individuals and social forces within the sports machine. The 3 cultural forms will be images, numbers, and words. So that's the overview. With that in mind, I want to introduce you to each of the 12 lenses very briefly in order, so you just have a sense of the kind of itinerary that you're going to be undertaking with me in the next 14 weeks. So in 2 weeks, because we don't have lecture next Monday, on the 23rd, we'll start with what may be the most basic or fundamental fact of sports culture: the primary role played in it by the human body. How do we experience the human body in sports? How do we experience our own body and those of athletes we watch? What is the relationship of body and mind? Is there anything distinctive about the experience of the body in sports culture? How can we talk about and reflect on those experiences of the body in ways that can shed light on what it means to have, or to be in, or just to be a human body? How are the seemingly individual and very private experiences of our bodies affected by society and culture? Next, we will examine what many historians and philosophers of sport consider to be the deepest impulse driving the emergence of sports in their myriad forms: the desire to play. How do we characterize play? What purpose does it serve human beings? How do mind and body relate to one another in play? What features and functions of play can we find in sports? And what features and functions of play get lost in sports, and why? Following and building from that examination of embodiment and play, we're going to take up the third of the four individual lenses, limits. What different forms do limits take in sports? How do physiological and physical properties and forces shape sports? What about things like rules, time, space, equipment? Do opponents function as a limiting force? How do athletes and spectators experience and respond to limits? And what do their experiences and responses tell us about how we can experience and respond to limits outside of sports? Finally, we will examine the values that our imaginary individual might bring to or draw out of the sports machine. What role do such intangible but cherished ideals as excellence, beauty, fairness, and sportsmanship play within the basic dynamics of embodiment, play, and limit that we've looked at so far? Where did these values come from? Are they beneficial? Are they harmful? And are they so equally for everyone involved in global sports? So we've looked at the individual as a body at play, as a body at play confronting certain limits, and as a body at play confronting certain limits and carrying into that engagement certain values. Next, over the second 4 weeks of the course, we'll begin to add in what we see when we look at the machine through the lens of various social forces, beginning with organizations or governing bodies, whether they are private or public, nonprofit, or commercial, or some weird mix. What purposes were organizations like the National Collegiate Athletic Association or FIFA created to serve? How have these purposes evolved? What relationship do they have to bodies, play, limits, and values? How do they interact with other social and cultural forces? Do these organizations work? Can we improve them? Do we need them at all? How do we decide? As your answers to what the sports machine suggests, maybe the most obvious thing about the sports machine is that it is a major economic force with billions of dollars circulating through it every year. From the point of view of markets, athletes are workers whose labor, when combined with outlays of various kinds of capital, generate a performance that we spectators consume. In addition, a whole range of related industries, from construction to communications and from beverage to apparel manufacturing, shape and are shaped by sports culture. How do these various markets work? What happens to the individual and institutional components of the sports machine when they become engaged with local and global market forces? Anybody know what that's a shot of? I mean, obviously it's a golf ball, but yeah, it's a Tiger Woods putt that stopped right there on national TV, obviously, which is amazing for Nike. All right, speaking of, in certain ways, the media is the means by which those performances generated by the sports machine are brought to market so that we can consume them. But the news media also reports on events within the sports machine, and it also generates revenues by selling advertisers' products. So how do these three roles, entertainment, reporting, and marketing, relate to one another? What about more subtle roles that the media plays in shaping our desires and those of athletes? How does the media influence our way of experiencing and thinking about bodies, play, limits, values, organizations, and the market? Though many sports fans wish it were different, sports can never be free of politics. Some of you are going to get very upset about this over the course of the term. Whether through governmental regulation or in more subtle forms, politics, the activities by which we in a society organize ourselves, manage our resources, and navigate our differences, is always at work in sports, and in fact is influenced by what happens in sports. So looking at the sports machine through the lens of politics will mean trying to understand the roles that politics actually plays there, the relationship of politics to other elements of the sports machine, and thinking about how sports can make us understand politics and act politically in new ways. Lastly, we're going to think about culture as bridging or mediating between individuals and the society in which they live. And so we'll conclude by looking at images, numbers, and words. Most of us think of images without thinking too much about them. We look through them as a kind of transparent window through which we can get an unobstructed view of the stuff we really care about in sports. Great games, heroic performances, and close calls. But here we'll be looking not through, but rather at images. How are they conceived, designed, produced, circulated, and consumed? How do they work in relation to other components of the sports machine? How do they work on us? How can we interpret given images more actively and freely? And how can we become producers of our own alternative images of sport? Now, try to imagine modern sports without numbers. We use them to tally the score, to identify players, to compare performances historically through the keeping of records. We've used numbers to measure the bodies of athletes. And today, digital technologies and statistical methods allow more minute tracking of athletic bodies and performances than ever before. Are numbers a more objective way to access sports? How do numbers and quantitative thinking shape the individual aspects of and social dimensions of sports we've studied? How do they relate to other cultural forms like images and words? Finally, we will conclude this conceptual tour through the sports machine with a close look at words and at language more broadly. Language, as you already saw through our discussion of metaphor, can be tricky. It always conveys more and less than what we intend by it. What forms of language does the sports machine generate? Here's one of my favorites. How does the complexity of language relate to other cultural forms like images and numbers? How is it influenced by and how does it influence social components of the sports machine? Politics, media, markets, and institutions. And how does it not only reflect, but help to create or shape our sense of embodiment, play, limitation, and values? How can we use it, language, to make the sports machine work better for ourselves and for others? So that's a quick overview of the broad areas we're going to be covering. Now, as you know, you're also going to be attending discussion sections. We got 2 minutes. Don't even start. Thank you. Discussion sections a couple times a week. I want you to really work in discussion sections because that's the opportunity to make the stuff that I'll be talking about on Mondays at 11 very concrete. I will throw out examples in coming weeks during lectures, but you're going to get to come up with your own and have some that your GSIs will supply for you during discussion sections too. So in the week ahead, I want to flag, first of all, by 10 p.m. tonight, you need to post your quotes and notes to Canvas. That's to the Canvas site for your discussion section. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to read the course syllabus and you'll find out. So that's number 2, read the course syllabus, because in discussion this week, that's the first thing you're going to do. We're going to go over the syllabus together in our discussion section so you'll know exactly what we expect from you, and you can sort of let us know what you expect of us, sort of. Finally, there's an article on Canvas. It's about 10 pages long that I'd like you to read. It's by 2 of the biggest names in sports studies, Ben Carrington and Dave Andrews. And they look at sport as escape, struggle, and art. And I want you to think about that in relation to what we talked about today as a sports machine, and think of escape, struggle, and art as products of that machine. Normally, I'll leave you a little bit of time for questions at the end of class. Have a good week. Hi.
I'm supposed to give you this.
You should probably give it to your discussion, your GSI. Yeah.
Okay, not to you. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, though.
I'm on the wait list for the class.
Which class?
This class.
Which discussion section? That's what really matters. Sorry.
You're on
Tuesday and Thursday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Okay. Where are you on the wait list? Okay. All I can tell you is show up because that's a GSI taught section. And so we are legally not allowed to go above 25. But if you're first and someone drops or changes sections, you would just automatically get a permission. So show up and let them know. How do I get this out? Hi.
I'd like to introduce myself.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Faye.
Oh, you're Faye. You wrote me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think that's possible or
Go to
not?
the discussion section.
Just go to it Wednesday?
That's what you have to
All
do.
right, perfect.
Yeah, and it depends on where you are in the list and how many people drop because we can't go over 25
Yeah.
because of the GSI contract.
All right, cool. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Faye. Hey.
I just want to introduce
Okay.
myself. My name is Khalid Hudson.
I'm sorry.
Khalid Hudson.
Khalik Hudson. Nice to meet you. Okay.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks for doing so.
I'm Quinn Nordine.
You are
Quinn Nordine.
Quinn. Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Quinn. I need to get out of here. Yes. Go ahead.
I'm Brendan.
Okay.
I'm on the wait list. I'm like number 1 for.
Go to the section
Okay. All right.
and let them know
Okay. All right.
and
thank
see
you.
what happens.
Hi, I just want to introduce myself.
Okay.
I'm Vanessa Krause.
Hi, Vanessa. Nice to meet you too. Okay.
Is everything okay?
Everything was fine, other than my timing. But that always happens the first day. Let me get this off and.